Hey, welcome to the first installment of Hanging with Anton. Today from Birmingham, UK. We're going to interview a legend, a true icon, and that would be an understatement, of grindcore and metal, Mr. Shane Embury. Come with me.
For any serious metal or grindcore fan, Shane Embury needs no introduction. Leader of the legendary Napalm Death and active in many side projects, he is one of the initiators of extreme metal. We traveled to Shane's hometown, Birmingham, UK, to get first-hand insight into his life, past, present and future. Napalm Death had just finished the European headlining tour Campaign for Musical Destruction with a sold-out homecoming show when we caught up with him at the band's longtime home, affectionately known as Napalm Towers.
All right, Shane, here we are, the infamous Napalm Towers.
Napalm Towers, as they call it,
Yeah.
or as one of our close friends called it, I think, many years ago.
Yeah.
He was also affectionately known as Roasters because he eats lots of roast potatoes. But there we are.
How long have you been, when did you move in here actually?
Came here in, I think about April, about this time in 1993.
Jesus, 32 years ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Wow, that's crazy, man.
Mitch found the place, Mitch Harris. Looking for a big place, and then, it just seemed to tick the boxes. We were thinking about having a rehearsal space here at one time or another, but didn't get that far. So the four of us lived together. Yeah, we moved in, and then it was, I guess, the grindcore version of The Young Ones, which is a BBC comedy from many years ago.
I remember. And when did you decide to go pro, or was it something that just happened to you? Oh, we got enough money now to, buy a house or whatever.
Well, I think it was a case of the manager at the time. There was a guy called Mark Walmsley. He was with us for a few years. He also managed Cardiacs, which is the other band.
Yeah, your favourite band.
My favourite band, and it was a suggestion that he made, really. And of course, being musicians starting out, it was hard to get what you call a mortgage. It was between four of us. It wasn't the greatest option at the time. But we did it, and then that was that, really. And then over the course of the years, when people left and stuff, it became a bit interesting to work out. But whatever. So it just seemed a good option, really, to try and to do that.
But it worked out in the long run.
In the long run, it worked out. Yeah. At the time, it seemed a bit chaotic because you've got four individuals living together.
How was that? I mean, I was because I met you guys in '97, and then I came here to this house in 2001 to hang out with Jesse for a while. Just watching Bill Hicks videos and stuff like that, and getting drunk. But I was wondering how it was when you were in your 20s. Like four guys living together. That must have been total mayhem.
Well, I don't know if every band operated in this fashion. And I've gone through this at various lengths with a few friends of mine. But because I'm from, I was born in a small village, not in the city. And of course, Jesse, Mitch and Danny were from America.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, I'd always wanted brothers. And of course, I got brothers. Brothers, we fight at times, we argue, as brothers do. But we got on generally, and some bands at the time, like say Benediction or other bands, they were baffled at the fact that we all lived together. Because, you got to think, at the time, or as we do now, you go on tour for 6 weeks, be together, do your gig, we drink, we were drinking. I went from not being much of a drinker to quite a drinker. And then, of course, we come home, and then, of course, in the 1990s, the band, like every week, there was like Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, Chili Peppers, Sonic Youth, besides the death metal, kind of, all the bands playing.
And you went to the gigs together.
So we would go to the gigs together. Usually, generally, me, Mitch, and Jesse. Danny was always reserved.
All right.
Danny liked to fire it up on a Sunday,
Always the wrong time.
which is back in the English, back in the early '90s. The Sunday was the 10:30 closing.
Yeah.
That was our rest day.
Yeah.
So we used to go partying, and we had of course you're single, so your eating structure is very basic. It's not like but we generally got on. It was pretty chaotic, but fun, because you're younger and you've got your lack of responsibility, as such.
I guess, yeah.
So, yeah.
But I always wondered how, because Mitch and Jesse, they came over, and later Danny, and they were really young still.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how they adjusted, to that, to being away from the family and just going into this crazy world of, death metal
I
and
think,
grindcore.
well, because the house we lived at before this was further down from here, but I think it may have hit Jesse, I think, harder, because Jesse had left a girlfriend, and the Mexican family was very close. I'm not saying Mitch's family weren't close, but it was just different,
Is it true what it says in your book that Jesse came over thinking that he was just coming over for a
I think
tour,
so,
and then
yeah.
he didn't know he was supposed to be staying as part of the band?
Yeah, I don't think it was explained to him.
Wow.
That was the idea. I mean, at the time, of course, there wasn't so many. It isn't like now where you have like a complete schedule ahead of you. But I remember he went back home, and he'd experienced Europe for probably 2 months, I guess. So of course he was young, and he went back talking like a Birmingham. The rest of his friends were like,
What's going on?
I think he even became vegetarian for a brief time, and they were like, "What the hell's going on with this guy? What is this vegetarian?"
As a Mexican, that's unheard
They
of.
were like, of course, I don't think it lasted very long, but so I think he just thought that he was just joining for that tour, and we were like, "Well, no, we need to start rehearsing for the Harmony Corruption album, And he's like, and I guess then he came, and then Mitch was already here, because the whole basis of it was insanity, because Jesse couldn't get in originally, as you probably know, because the visa wasn't.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at the same time, Mickey, being Mickey, asked Mitch. So Mitch came in.
Without you knowing.
Without really, I sort of half knew, but not really, And then that's how the kind of two guitarist things came, which was great, of course, but very strange when you think about how the...
And you say Jesse had a harder time adapting to.
I think at first. I mean, they both loved the fact that they could drink beer at the age of 18.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because of course in the States, 21. So they loved that, and of course, the local heavy metal female brigade were quite happy with the fact that there was two Americans frequenting Edwards Number 8 every Saturday. So they were pretty popular.
I can imagine. In the early history of Napalm Death, you kind of went up pretty quick, I mean, you became a really successful band in a short period of time, really. But then at the end of the 90s, there were worse times ahead, And I was going to ask you what were your feelings, because I'm not sure what your previous history was like, but you had a job before you joined Napalm.
Well,
right?
Small ones, briefly. I mean, I was generally not into working.
But basically you. Well, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd say I'll tell you, a piece of cheese is a piece of cheese. Yeah. I'll tell you how it is.
No, that's fine. I agree, actually.
Yeah.
So but so that means you went from living with your parents pretty much to Napalm Towers.
Well, how that came about was, and again, I'm not gonna. I'll try not to go off on my Jungian.
No, it's fine. I'm sure people like to hear it.
But it's like I grew up in the small village of Broseley, Shropshire. My mum, my nan, well, almost like two mums. As I am finding out, I was probably a spoilt more than I think I was. So, when it's time to, I left school at the age of 16. And I kind of figured out, oh, that was it, you know, lay around for a bit. My dad wasn't having that.
Yeah.
So he got me into what they call a youth training scheme program, which was like £26, 25 a week. I was just humping a bunch of cement around for a year. This is horrible.
Yeah.
Then I did that for a year, then left. And then briefly worked, and that's when I met the Napalm guys in '86. You know, so I would come over here to go to the Mermaid, which is not far. And then obviously eventually joined in '87. So you're working on and off various small jobs and stuff until finally moving here in 1990. You know. And I've lost track of the question you told me again because I
No, that's fine. That's fine. We kind of had a recap, but now we fast forward to the end of the '90s. You know, when Harmony Corruption and Utopia already happened. You know,
and I think
first of all, I want to ask you this because that really stood out for me in your book. That you decided to kind of change direction after because of one bad review.
One bad review. Yeah. Well,
does Don Kay even know about it?
Yeah, I told him. Yeah, I told him. I said he pissed me off. And, but that again is immaturity, you know. And I think, as you said, the band flew. I mean, that's down to John Peel, you know, primarily, you know, Enemy, and so yeah, the band sort of just. I mean, it could have. Think about it. It could have been Repulsion. It could have been Terrorizer, but it was Napalm. You know, aware. But it was. I think in the early '90s. I mean, Harmony Corruption came out, and then Mickey Harris left. It was kind of weird. It was death metal, and Mick left, and we were all into so much different music that. After Utopia, I don't know. Maybe who knows what was going through me, Jesse, and Mitch's heads primarily at the time, because I would probably never take a review that way now. I wouldn't give a shit now. And after a while, I didn't give a shit. Yeah. But for some reason, it was just like I guess because we reunified as a band. Danny had come in and we were blasting and we were doing everything we wanted to do. That review just pissed us off, which is kind of stupid because you know. I think there's immature or of competitiveness in it, you know. Whereas like it was almost like me, Mitch, and Jesse were like thriving on reaction, and where we played with Obituary in '92, and people would react more in some ways to Obituary because they're slower, and it seemed like people would just look at us. Now I in latter years I would go, oh well, that's fine. But for some reason, our insecurity took over in a way. Yeah. But also mixed in with the fact that during 92, 93, 94, me, Mitch and Jesse were hanging out in the clubs a lot. We were listening to lots of like different music. A lot of the grunge stuff was coming in.
Helmet and stuff
and we loved those beats.
Yeah.
The riffs, of course, but it was the beats that we found exciting. Me and Mitch were totally into this groove thing that we loved. And we thought, and then of course some people, the odd person, you know, you're drinking in costermongers and someone goes, that riff in so-and-so song, it's such a great riff, but only comes in for 5 seconds. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Why don't we make more of those great riffs as opposed to just blasting every chance we get, you know? And Utopia is pretty much a full-on album, you know, after Harmony. And also those extra tracks with it. There's 21 tracks. And so the way we sort of did it was, I think, a bit immature in a way, look in hindsight. Yeah. But it was also necessary because Cradle of Filth were coming in, black metal was getting popular, you know, and people were sort of like, oh, I'm into that, you know. Yeah. And I like a lot of black metal, but at the time I was not. I was into something else. Yeah. So there was a bit of immaturity in that review. Obviously, going that, you know, I was like, who is this? This Don Kay character says this, you know. Does he understand the riffs? You know, then that made us think, well, people here is just blast beat and not the technicality. Yeah. And that really pissed us off. And we thought, well, we're going to just do what we want. Ultimately, the decision was we're going to do what we want. You know, and of course that caused interesting conflict within the band because at the time Barney then had moved from Birmingham to London, so we weren't as close as much. You know, not communicating in the same wavelength, I don't think, you know. Yeah. So it was interesting.
And you did change, and eventually interest in the band started to wane a little?
I think it waned for various reasons. You got like, okay, Napalm Death isn't as fast as Emperor, you know. Machine Head's coming in with the, you know, and
that whole stuff, yeah.
and as you see a lot of time, you know, if you manage to last the course, which somehow I have, you know, we have rather, you start to see these patterns of like, you know, what's the word I'm looking at? Patterns of not regeneration, but not recycling, but you know, things come around. It's not fads.
It's cyclic. Everything is cyclic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's when Missile Waste come out, you know, I love the guys from the Waste. They brought back the high tops, you know.
Yeah.
I remember watching them for the first time, going, Jesus Christ, I'm watching Anthrax in '86.
Yeah, exactly.
It was great. Better than Anthrax, I thought personally, but you know. So you see these things coming along, so you can look at it. But at the time, you know, I mean, I remember we did the show with you in Santiago, the best show probably ever, in my opinion, for me.
I was just going to ask you.
Yeah,
about
probably
that,
the best gig I've ever done in my entire life, in my opinion, in my memory. That and it's Monterey with Breweria is probably my top 2 gigs ever.
Oh, really?
You know.
Wow.
And of course, you got, you know, we come back from, we did that and we went to Mexico City, I think it was. That's when with Exodus. I was hanging out with Bailoff, totally chuffed to bits with Bailoff. Bailoff was banging Brewer's door down trying to get in, and for various reasons. And anyway, and then of course you go back and you jump on the bus to do the second part of the European tour. So I'm there watching this like camcorder footage of Santiago with like 4,000, 5,000 kids. Get to the, you know, you get to the Marktaler, you know, which we just played the big room again. And of course, because the scene had changed, you're playing the small room, and we're like, huh. Well, that's a buzzkill and a half. That is. It's like Santiago. I'm like, I don't want to go back to Chile. Thank you very much.
What kind of effect did that have on you as a person and as a band?
Kind of bummed out. I mean, not all the shows, and of course the venue's fine. It's just that you know, again, evidence of you being younger, I think, and the ego's in place, or it's that flying too high. You know, it's just trying to reach that balance of the middle road. You know, don't fly too high, don't fly too low, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of an awakening, really, but you know, you get through it. I know that was probably the beginning, I think, because the manager started to lose his plot, midlife crisis vibe. Because ironically, before Mick left, he sort of semi-forced us into signing a 7-album contract with Earache, you know, and then left.
Yeah.
And the manager, before he sort of went off on a tangent, just said, "You realise you shouldn't really sign this. You should really just do 3 albums." And Mickey was like adamant that we should, because I guess he needed some money or something. Wow. And of course, you're young, and then you know, and by the time we were on that last album with Earache, it was like the sales had kind of like that. You know?
Well, you know, I'm a big fan of that period, actually. Yeah. Fear, Emptiness, Despair, and the Diatribes and so on. And I have this version, this theory rather, than that every band has like their own turbo album. You know, that when it comes out, people go like, "Oh, this is rubbish. I don't like this." You know, but now when Judas Priest played Turbo Lover, everybody sings along, and it's a classic. You know, I guess that's kind of happened to you as well.
Again, how honest do you want to be about yourself as a person? I think, and that's part of growing up. Again, part of trying to mature is to go, how honest do you want to be about yourself as a person? Because you can sit there. I mean, I'm classic for this. I've got, you know, I'm this, and that. But there's also the darker side to me, as I said, which I'm not happy about really. And you're trying to integrate these things, and you know, it's like, well, yeah, we did these albums, but then, ironically, 20 years later, you have like guys from Dillinger Escape Plan and Converge telling me that they got into Napalm at that point, not before, you know, depending. So you go, well, that's kind of weird, but understandable. My friend Duncan, who was played bass for Nathrak for a while, you know, you see Duncan, I've seen him for a while actually, but you know, he's got the doom patches on, he looks totally crustcore and stuff. I'm like, oh, Duncan, man, he's the man on the scene. You know, he's younger than me, but I always loved him. Man on the scene. And then we were hanging out one night. He goes, "Oh yeah, I got into Napalm with Night Diatribes." And he showed me some picture where he's got his short back hair and his Limp Bizkit shirt on. And I'm going, I guess the point I'm trying to make in a very long way is that, you know, you change and you turn, and, you know, and yeah, we have those turbo albums, I suppose. That's your question in a long way, really, you know.
Yeah, but you know, but they are as valuable as
Yeah, of course.
everything else you've done.
Well, you got
know?
to look at. Look at Rush. You know, I mean, Rush changed and turned and twisted so many times.
Oh yeah.
And I wouldn't compare Napalm to the immensity of Rush. But you know, I think if you're an artist or you certainly in my latter years for me, where one of my quests is just to make really interesting music, and I don't care what anybody thinks anymore.
Yeah.
As long as I'm happy.
Did you read Jerry Lee's book?
No, I haven't read it.
It's really interesting, and I found it. I mean, exactly all due like difference between and whatever level they are on, but it's so relatable as a musician. Everything that they went through, you know.
Yeah.
The criticism, the same thing. You know, he was very insecure about his voice at some point because people said he sounded like a bird or something. You know. So yeah, I mean. There's a lot of similarities. Even of course, the genius of them is untouched. But
I think and there will be, isn't there? There's many similarities through the majority of bands because you are in that kind of playground a little bit. You know, you are allowed that, say, the childlike thing, but you know, it's critics. How are you going to deal with someone criticising you? You know, when you're younger, I think especially probably it's harder. Maybe you know. I always like Anthony Hopkins. Always said that one thing. The actor. It's like none of my business what people think of me.
That's brilliant.
And I love that. It hits the nail on the head every time.
Absolutely.
There are certain rare occasions when various key persons get together at the same place at the same time, marking the beginning of a new movement or scene. One of these occasions, perhaps the big bang of the UK grindcore scene, happened at the place where Shane took us next, an old pub in Birmingham with a lot of history.
So, where are we here?
Well, we are in a place called Sparkbrook, which is in Birmingham. And this building here, is what used to be called the Mermaid.
All right.
So it's an Irish pub. And I came here on March the 30th, 1986, because my friend Mitch Dickinson, who was in Unseen Terror with me, he came into Birmingham a week previous and got tapped on the shoulder by a guy called Justin Broderick.
Right.
And Justin said, "Hey, I'm looking at your patches on the back, and you've written a band called Siege from Boston.
No.
I have a band like Siege, and they're called Napalm Death."
Oh wow.
And so Mitch came back to Broseley, Shropshire, and told me this. And you want to go to the gig next week? So we did. We came into Birmingham, took the number 6 bus from town all the way down here. Got off here. Went through either this door or that door, I'm not sure, I think it's pretty much this door, if I recall, back in the day. And then there were 7 bands, a band called Scum Dribblers, Generic, Instigators, Heresy, Napalm Death, Amoebics, and I think a band called Dirge.
All right.
So 7 bands, and it was £1.50 to get in.
Just like now.
£1.50 for all them bands. I met the Napalm Death guys, Justin, met Nick Bullen. Mickey Harris jumped over very excitedly because he saw my denim cut off. You know, it was bleached with the Venom black metal Baphomet on the back.
So that was the first time you met him?
First time I met him.
Wow.
And we became friends.
Uh-huh.
And then subsequently, I guess, you know, there'll be shows here like 3-4 times.
Where were the shows? Were they upstairs?
Upstairs. The shows are upstairs. Yep, upstairs. And so you go up there, this door, I think, or that door, and then walk up the stairs. There'd be like a typical bar, and then like a small area, probably 100, 150 people, 100 people.
What the crowd? What was it
Well,
like?
the crowd was like mainly punk, but there were some heavy metal guys. There was like Frank Healy from Benediction. Of course, he was here. So at the time when I went in, it was just me and Mitch, and we had like, you know, the denim cut-offs on. So we kind of stood out, really, because it was mainly punks. And then over the course of a year and a half, more metal people kind of came along from various, because we started tape trading you know, things like that. They knew my band Warhammer a little bit, which is weird. I met Digby Pearson from Earache here that day, actually.
That day.
As the first day I met him, yeah, because
wow.
he was a fan of Warhammer, so we were talking about that.
Uh-huh.
Became friends with the Heresy guys, and Mitch Dickinson, of course, later joined Heresy, you know, on guitar. So it's quite an influential day, really. You know.
Wow.
And then, of course, there's a sweet shop up there. The first days Napalm Death ever had was all the way back down there. So yeah, it's,
So would you regard this as a birthplace of grindcore, or?
possibly in a way. It's certainly you know, I mean, Napalm played here at least once every week. Promoter Daz Russell was doing the shows. Daz does the Rebellion Festival in Blackpool now.
Oh, really?
So that's Daz.
Wow. So how do you get to join Napalm then?
Get to join them. It's become friends with them. They became my favourite band. Every week we'd come and watch them, and of course every week Mickey would get faster. There was a competition between him and Steve from Heresy, who was the fastest, I think. I think Steve was as competitive as Mickey was. And then they eventually recorded the A-side of Scum, which is in a place, it's not there anymore, called Rich Bitch, which is a crossover in Selly Oak, that way.
All right.
That was the A-side, but originally it was going to be a split album, which they don't seem to record, but I do. I remember it was going to be a split album with a band called Atavistic, which never happened. So I was there when they did the recording. Shortly after, Justin became very disillusioned, I guess, and he was friends with the band Head of David. Head of David got signed to Blast First, which was Big Black's label. And so he joined them on drums. And then there was a point where they didn't have a guitar player, so Nick Bullen asked me to join Napalm Death on guitar in Coventry. And I agreed. And then went back to Jim Whiteley's house afterwards with Mickey. Showed him some songs that I hadn't practiced What You Preach, Unchallenged Hate, maybe Blind to the Truth. And then I kind of chickened out. I went back to Shropshire and winter came, and I just kind of, I don't know. I was still very insular, very village, you know, afraid to go out into the world.
That kind of mentality.
Yep. And then Mickey got impatient. There was no internet then, so he, Frank Healy joined briefly.
Oh, really?
He did a rehearsal, but every time, actually they played a show because Frank joined, then Lee Dorian joined, and the first gig Lee didn't know much of the lyrics, and every time the blast beat came in, Frank kept on playing faster because he thought he had to speed up. It was, you know, the timing was all shot. And so look, Frank didn't last, and then Mickey asked Bill Steer to join, and that was that.
Bill's from Birmingham as well?
No, Bill's from Liverpool.
From Liverpool.
So Bill was very young at the time. Bill would have been, I think, like 16 or 17. He was at college. So you take the train to Birmingham to rehearse, you know, very rarely. I mean, you didn't rehearse very much back then anyway.
Yeah.
They recorded the B-side of Scum, which I'm not a massive fan of. I thought it was...
No?
No, I like the A-side of Scum.
All right.
B-side to me. The story is, I don't know if this is true, and I'm going to say this anyway, is that Mickey was really into like Celtic Frost and death metal, and I heard that the band Larm from Holland didn't like Napalm. They said there was too much metal, too much heavy metal, too much death metal, or you know, the chunky riffs.
Yeah.
Which is, I like the fact that they went chunky like Celtic Frost and it was blast like Siege. That's what I thought was unique about Napalm. So I heard, I'm just hearing, that Mickey Harris cut his hair off and then chopped all the songs into slow pieces, short songs, which became the B-side of Scum.
All right.
That's what I heard. Yeah. So I kind of like it, but I prefer the A-side.
Okay.
And so when I joined, I wanted to bring back the heavy riff.
It seemed weird to me when I read the book that, you know, things sort of started to happen for Napalm Death, and then Lee left and Bill left, and it was like...
Well, again, I think as I've mentioned before, we were very young. I don't think we understood what was really happening to the band, the popularity.
Well, hindsight is obviously, you know, you can see what happened. But,
at the time, a lot of immaturity. I was very close friends with Mick, I thought, and then it just seemed that we had our own kind of idea of what we thought Napalm would be, and Lee and Bill had their ideas, you know, and then it clashed. And I think Lee had started to get into doom metal a lot. He started to really like Black Sabbath, started his own record label.
Yeah.
And of course, Bill had Carcass, and he was really sort of focused.
Oh, he was doing the
Yeah,
tour
he
at
was doing the same at the same
All
time.
right. Cool.
So I think after Japan, which was kind of like when it happened, they just decided that was that. That was that.
That's weird. I mean, you go to Japan and then you go like, I don't want this band anymore. But
Yeah, well, I think they wouldn't probably not see it this way, but they had options, I guess, in a way.
yeah,
For them, which were fulfilling their happiness,
yeah.
which is understandable. And for me and Mick, especially me, I was devastated, and I was like, what are we going to do? But we'd also become good friends with Barney at the time. Barney was in Benediction. He was very much into the kind of massacre death metal stuff, the Camely kind
Yeah,
of.
he was a big fan of Napalm.
Big fan of Napalm, and was kind of what we were looking for, really, I think.
Yeah,
And so there you go.
Cool, awesome. You once told me that you would have liked to put on a show with all the ex-members.
I was talking to my friend Becky, who does the press for Roadburn, and she was mentioning that again to me. But I think that the practicality of making that happen would be very, very difficult because there's egos, and
Oh yeah.
I think everyone. I
Have you-
think it'd be very difficult. I'd like to see it happen because it's something I think is very interesting when you look at the different bands over the years.
Yeah. Well, it
Sorry,
would
the
be an
different- the different
historical
members,
thing,
Yeah, I think it'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
And there's been a book that's come out on the Cardiacs recently, like a coffee table book, and then they wanted to do like the same thing with Napalm. So I've been talking to Nick Mullen about doing it, but we'll see. There's a lot. There's only so much time left. So we'll see.
There is time left.
Well, maybe. We'll see.
All right.
Birmingham is arguably the birthplace of heavy metal. We took Shane to a landmark, the Black Sabbath Bridge, to talk about his relationship with the city and how he views Napalm Death as part of the UK heavy metal lineage, and also obviously about Black Sabbath.
All right, so we're here on the Black Sabbath Bridge in central Birmingham.
And it's the first time I've actually been here, which is damn me. What's wrong with me?
Yeah, shame on you.
Cardinal sin or something like that, I guess. But yeah.
Who was your favorite member of the original Black Sabbath?
It would be Geezer.
Geezer.
But I always liked his, even before I became a bass player. If I am one, I suppose I am. But I always loved his style, really. There's something very fluent about it, and he added the right parts. And I also think that maybe because besides being the bass player, he was also a lyricist. He delved into the kind of horror elements, the fantastical elements, social kind of commentary, and a lot of things that I feel I've an affinity to, really, very similar. I think about him sometimes. He got the Black Sabbath name from watching the Boris Karloff movie, Black Sabbath, supposedly. And it's exactly the same things. Like he was there in his room, reflecting on the world and writing. And
Have you met him?
we were, because when he did his did a solo album with Burton from Fear Factory.
Oh yeah.
So Burton had come over, and we were practicing at Rich Bitch Studios, and then I met Tony Iommi first years ago when we were practicing for From Enslavement to Obliteration, and I met Geezer then, and he was asking me what studio. We were recording Diatribes, that's right, or something. And he was asking me what the studio was like. I said, well, it's okay, but it's maybe you want something different. But he always seemed like a nice guy, mellow, brummy accent, always, the kind of vibe. So I was quite in awe, really.
I imagine. You didn't get to see Black Sabbath with Ozzy, or like the original.
Not back in the day.
Not back in the day.
Our sound engineer, stroke producer, the illustrious, famous Simon Efferman.
Simon. Uh-huh.
He will gladly tell you about Never Say Die. He saw them at the Birmingham Odeon, which actually is just down the road. You had the blue ticket. If you had the blue ticket at Birmingham Odeon, it meant you were like right down the front. The blue ticket. He saw them with Van Halen supporting.
Wow.
Which that is the tour.
Envy.
That is the tour when supposedly Van Halen with the.
Oh man.
On fire. Well, they were on
Jesus.
fire. And we talk about the Priest supporting it with Accept, stuff like that. But that was just down there. It's now only a movie theatre. That's just down there on New Street. That might be some place to go. But Sabbath. I always loved Sabbath, and growing up in Shropshire, their lyrics were fantastical, and their songs are always epic, and they had lots of changes, which I loved, because that's what I do at Merciful Fate. Merciful Fate were like Sabbath to me. You know, there's different tempo changes, you know, which is brilliant, you know. We tried to do in Tronos quite a lot, is that kind of same thing. It's just, you know, it's kind of strange in a way that the effect Sabbath had on me as I get older, more now even.
Are you more of a Ozzy or a Dio kind of guy?
It's a tough one. I think that's very tough, because Sabotage is probably my all-time favourite Sabbath album. But
yeah, that's unusual.
But at the same time, I love Dio Sabbath too. You know, when I used to drink, you know, and Neon Nights would come on, game over, pretty much.
And being from the same city as Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, of course, do you consider
Judas Priest? But
close
almost,
enough?
Close enough. Yeah.
Would you consider Napalm Death to be part of that same lineage?
Well, I think when you ask Barney this question, you know, or because a lot of people say, you know, does your area have a reflection on who you are and what music you listen to? I'm not so sure about what music you listen to, but you have to think about growing up in like an industrial town. I mean, especially with Sabbath in the 60s. You know, the area was pretty rough.
Yeah,
you know,
I imagine.
When I grew up, it was probably not as rough, but you know. But I mean, I'm close to a place called Iron Bridge, which is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, which then crept up towards Birmingham. But musically, I mean, Napalm Death is different from Sabbath, but you have to think that in some ways how far Napalm Death has been fortunate to go and travel and be based in Birmingham, you know, still here, you know. Yeah. And for me, you can look at it two ways. You can say, well, I don't know, but if I get in touch with my kind of rock metal roots of who I am, then I'm proud and very happy. I feel, in a way, to go forth, you know, as a. If you look at a big family tree, whatever kind of tree that would be, I think Napalm Death should be on there with Sabbath somewhere.
Of course,
you know.
Of course. I went to see an exhibition once about
that's
Birmingham
right.
metal.
Yeah.
And there were a few items that you lent apparently to that. That thing. You remember
there was. I think Napalm got mentioned within the home of metal, you know, because
there were some tapes and I think even shirts and stuff like that.
Yeah, some of the old Napalm tapes, because there's the home of metal foundation organisation, which is Lisa Mayer, who does the Supersonic Festival. So she created it. It's basically primarily a homage to Sabbath, really, but of course Napalm is, you know, in there with it, really. And of course, a lot of the punk bands. I mean, Discharge is one of the Discharge favourite bands with Black Sabbath, and Motorhead, you know, which I think in turn influenced them to be Discharge, even though you would never really think at the time.
Yeah. How do you feel about, you know, the mainstream recognition? And I don't only mean the public, but also like governmental institutions and stuff like that. Do you think that's needed or desirable, or?
What do you mean?
Like, if the city of Birmingham was to do like a Napalm Death Bridge or put a blue plaque on Napalm Towers, you know?
Well, that would be a bit hard, but I mean, I don't. It doesn't really. I don't feel it one way or another, you know. I mean, honestly, if I'm honest, let's be honest. I mean, the Sabbath thing that's coming up, I would have loved Napalm Death to be part of that, either play or something, but it didn't get to be, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, I'm from close to Birmingham. There's only Barney that's actually from Birmingham, you know, really. But we're based here. I mean, Danny, he's from Los Angeles. We might as well be Birmingham because he loves curries. And he's just happy.
He's been here long enough.
He's been here long enough to be. He's been here long enough. I mean,
adopted.
I think if you add it up, he's probably been here as much as he has been in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
you know. I don't think it's. I think it's good. I mean, personally, this bridge is great, but they should have a statue. I mean, you should really. I think if you drive into Birmingham, it should be "Welcome to Birmingham, home of Black Sabbath." That's what you should have, or home of heavy metal.
absolutely.
The West, that's what should, I mean, you should go on the map, Google map, and it should be there. West Midlands, the birthplace of heavy metal, in my opinion.
Speaking of mainstream recognition, I sometimes feel that Napalm Death, being far more extreme than other bands, has kind of managed that crossover sometimes, like playing festivals like Glastonbury or Primavera Sound in Spain, stuff like that, you know, which is like really mainstream, like there's indie and techno and this and that,
so
you know,
different, yeah.
and you get Napalm Death on there. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think originally Napalm Death, when they first kind of formed in the bedroom, when there was Nicholas Bullen, Miles Ratledge, they're just two young kids in Meriden, in Solihull. They were primarily influenced by Crass and Throbbing Gristle. Mm-hmm. Not metal at all. Yeah. And then they kind of went through the scene, 85, 86, going to Celtic Frost, hardcore punk, Discharge. And then the people that came into the band, we've all been into different genres of music, and somehow it's morphed into Napalm Death sound, where, you know, there's a lot of death metal in there, hardcore punk, a lot of industrial, a lot of noise rock, all these different formats. Lyrically, it's very outspoken towards the punk movement, and I think alternate festivals have kind of warmed to it, because also over the years, I mean, I think the fans of music now, they cross over more than they used to. Like years ago, I think it was more separated, but the festivals embraced it all. I think because sometimes when you're in the band, it's hard to look at it. You don't want to say this sometimes, but sometimes I think Napalm Death is very hard to categorise. It's this, but it's also that.
Yeah.
And that's got easier to place in different places. But a long time ago, it was very difficult to do that, because it was known for, you know, is it metal? Is it punk? Is it, you know? So Glastonbury and Primavera, and there's also got a few festivals in Poland over the years. Roadburn is quite a different festival, you know. So I like those festivals because it's more of an eclectic style of music.
Well, I think nowadays the way kids discover new music has changed a lot as well, you know, because they go on YouTube and they get all these suggestions of stuff, you know, that might interest them, you know, so they just dive into it and just end up with like the craziest crossovers, you know, and stuff. But that's not a bad thing.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I do it myself. I mean, I hate, in some ways, you know. I mean, I will tune into Spotify, even though it's not the thing to do. But it's convenient for me to listen in a way when I'm out and about. Yeah. If I hear a band, I see a band, I go, what do they sound like? But of course, then you do get well, if you like this, you might like this, and then you find. I always find 3 or 4 bands that, that's really good. Whereas, of course, back in the day, you were like, well, that album cover's really good. Like the Cirith Ungol album, you know, Frost and Fire, whatever it was, good. Not much. Great album cover, terrible guitar sound.
Yeah, and the screechy vocals.
Yeah, but you got to take the plunge, you know. Now you don't have to take the plunge as much, I guess. But you know, but it's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, if you like this, you might like that, and check it out.
Our next stop was a place that is an integral part of Napalm Death history, where many of their classic albums were written and where the band has been rehearsing for decades. Shane dissected the creative process of Napalm Death for us, as well as giving us a little history lesson centered around the studio called Robanas.
All right, so here we are at...
Well, this is in a building we've been rehearsing at in Birmingham since 1991, a place called Robanas. We 1991, I think it was the first time we started here. I remember they had a flood in the early 90s and we had a massive Utopia banished backdrop get damaged, which was rather disappointing.
Yeah.
There you go. Don't leave your treasures of backdrops, etc., left in a building where you might get flooded. Anyway, but so this place is called Robanas, and we've been here ever since 1991. We've kind of seen it grow because there's only a few rehearsal rooms at first, and now I think there's like 60 or 70 here now.
Wow. And they have a recording studio as well. I know because I recorded some
yeah,
stuff
well,
here.
we did some of the Brujeria stuff here, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly.
And that was, I don't know how long ago that was now, 5 years, probably at least.
Something like that.
And so that was that. They used to have,
did you record any Napalm stuff here?
we
as
did
well?
the Leaders Not Followers 2 album here, actually. Thinking about it, we did, yeah. And that was an interesting record because we were without a record deal. I think Century Media were interested. But we went through a weird hiatus in 2002, 2003 where I didn't even know if the band was going to carry on at that point, to be fair, to be truthful. We just weren't doing anything. As such, the odd show, the odd tour. So we started recording that here. I think we started it with Simon FME, and then Russ finished it, or the other way around. And that was the first release for Century. What else have we done? Anything else here? I think Barney comes here to do the odd backing vocal on so sometimes he gets asked to do vocals on whoever. But yeah, we've been here since 1991, and in the older days when we were a 5-piece, we had a locate for a period of time, like during Diatribe, Inside the Torn Apart, Fear, Emptiness, Despair. Because in the older days we would rehearse for 3-4 months at a time, purely for an album, and put it here. Do that here, and then afterwards it was just for tours. We get together. This is like our own sort of little lockout that we have. We've had this for a couple of 3 years.
Keep your
now.
gear and stuff.
Some of it, yeah. I'm going to get a separate room as well. I mentioned for my other stuff, just because just to have the stuff set up and to play loud. Really, you can't really do that, anywhere else. But yeah, we've watched it grow over the years. I mean, now, not now. There used to be like a live room that Sabbath practiced in for some of their shows.
Oh, yeah.
Judas Priest have been down here. Prodigy have been here. Robert Plant will come in from time to time.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, I, for me, moving my own gear down here at some point, I think it's quite nice because you're going to a specific place to do your thing.
Set the world out and
so you're there for this, and of course you might go upstairs and you just bump into somebody. So that's all good connection, isn't it? You're making these connections with people like we are again today, talking about stuff, and that's really good. So it's your own environment. But yeah, we've been here for years. Watched it grow from a very small thing, but. Yeah, I got happy for Rob in a way because, of many ways, because he stuck at it. He's not into metal as such. He likes all kinds of music. But also, he hires the gear for the Bloodstock Festival.
Right.
Or rents the gear, rather, and lots of other festivals around. So it's kind of nice to watch him and his rehearsal place grow as I think the band has grown, in a way,
Exactly.
And then you realise, of course, it's like, from like 33, 34 years ago, and you're like, wow, it's a long time. Yeah.
So you basically wrote all your albums here?
The majority, yeah. I mean, we certainly, if I recall right, it's hard to be 100% accurate, but I do remember that we rehearsed here we definitely rehearsed here for Utopia Banished. And I remember we were going on tour with Pestilence, Cannibal Corpse, Death. Was there another band? I can't remember. Dismember. And there was like Christmas festivals in 1991. And so that's right. We'd rehearsed here and we were recording extra. Was it 91 or was it 92? 91, I'm sure it was. Yeah, 91. We rehearsed here and we did Nazi Punks for the alternative technicals. So we rehearsed that and we recorded it in Stratford-upon-Avon, actually, that's right, later on that day. And the bus picked us up and went on tour for 5-6 days. Something weird like that.
All right.
Bit too much information, but there you go. But yeah, most of the albums have been done here, pretty much.
What's your creative process? I was wondering, because it was like you brought a song or Mitch brought a song, or how has it changed over the years? Is it, if it has?
Well, it's quite different now in that when in the very first days that me, Mitch, and Jesse lived in, it was kind of part of the daily routine or weekly routine where, you know, we get up at various times. You know, my routine used to be get up, go to town, see my friend at the skate shop, have a sandwich, buy a CD from the Virgin Megastore, come back, and then before we went out, sometimes me, Jess, and Mitch would like show each other riffs like Master Bill Madness and Pride Assassin were like efforts from three of us together. Like I had a riff, you know, and it was kind of like that for a while. And then Utopia, there's a mixture. Sometimes some songs were all written by Mitch, some songs were like working for Sterling or Jesse. You know, Dementia Access is Mitch. So then it became quite split. You know, so it would be like, well, I've got one, you've got one, you know, and that carried on until I think up until Enemy, I guess, you know, where we each submit our own particular track, you know, and then Jesse left the band, and then it was me and Mitch sort of trading off. There was this kind of friendly, competitive thing.
I was going to ask about that because it's mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
They were kind of competitive about whose track was going to go first.
Yeah, Mitch was terrible for that, really.
Yeah.
You know, and I understand it a little bit. You know, I'd like to think I've overcome that kind of mine has to be first thing. You know, you're always quietly surprised when someone else chose yours first. You're like, oh, yeah, you know, but it doesn't really mean bollocks at the end of the day. I think not in the age of CDs and stuff, really, but when you can just easily skip, you know. No, there was a competitive thing. I think especially when we were all together, especially me and Mitch, because our styles aren't similar. But compared to Jesse, I think there was a, you know, of course, because I'd be sitting in my bedroom writing a riff acoustically, and then, you know, Mitch might walk past just to go to the kitchen. And I think we all, and he'd be doing the same thing. I think we subconsciously picked up each other's vibes. And so sometimes you come up with a riff and you go, kind of sounds like my fucking riff, you know, which probably wasn't. But the thing about the Greed Killing track is the thing I always laugh about a lot, because he had this massive section of riffing which went on and went on and went on and went on. I was going, well, it's not bad riffs. And then he kind of went into Greed Killing as it starts, you know? And I was like, well, why don't you just chop all that bollocks out and just start there? He's like, oh yeah. I said, it's right there, it's nailed, you know. A very different track for Napalm, of course.
Yeah.
And he used the other parts on the second Me Tuxedo album, which is fine, but it's more quirky. He just had this massive quirky piece that went into what I'd call a more logical piece, you know. So Mitch was like that sometimes, and sometimes he'd totally nail the arrangement, and then sometimes he couldn't finish the track. I'd have to come in and go, well, you know.
Well, but that's
good.
That's collaboration.
No, yeah, which is nice. Yeah. But there was this competitiveness a little bit between us, you know. I think, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, really, neither. You know, it's you recognising it. You know, it's all part of the growing up process, as I said. You know, but yeah. So and of course that stayed that way until only recently, in a way, with the last album, where, you know, Mitch had moved back to the States, and it was left to, well, it wasn't necessarily left, it was kind of assumed that I'd write all the songs, which I did. Didn't really. I think maybe my there's various ways of looking at it. I noticed that the past few years I did lots and lots of music, lots and lots of records. A close friend of mine suggests that the creativity stemmed from grief, the passing of my father. This was my way of dealing with my dad. Not being there, and there's probably a strong elements of truth in that.
The next morning we drove west to County Shropshire, where Shane grew up and became who he is today. He took us to his hometown and various places he used to haunt, giving us a unique tour of his childhood and adolescence.
All right. Okay, we're in Broseley, Shropshire,
Yes,
and this is where you grew up, no?
pretty much. I mean, I moved here on this road, in that particular house there. Probably about when I was 10 years old.
All right.
So, strangely enough, my first band, Warhammer, actually played a gig in that living room.
Oh shit! Come on.
There was obviously there's 4 of us in the band. Wayne, the guitar player, and Mike still live up there on the left. 4 of us in the band, and I believe John Walker and Ian Buchanan of the band Cancer were watching us.
All right.
So
They were the audience.
yeah, and there was a couple other people, at least 2 more people. And it was a Saturday afternoon. My dad was at the social club up the road.
All right.
And I'm not sure who my mum was. So somehow we managed to play the gig, and of course the next door neighbours on there
They
were
weren't impressed.
not very impressed. this side row was pretty cool, the other side, not impressed.
All right.
So yeah, for about the age of 10, until I left to move to Birmingham when I was probably, I don't know, 23, 24.
All right. So your teens and early 20s,
And
yeah.
of course over there you have a thing called the Fiery Fields, which is pretty much where I'd spend my weekends, you know, and so yeah, the little village centre is that way, which we can check out. So yeah, basically, you know, all around here you'd play as you were a kid, you know.
You were telling us about some shenanigans you got into when you were a kid.
Stealing
school gates.
I mean, I went to Dark Lane School. I'm not sure what it's called now, but they have John Wilkins' school over there, and I suppose I won't get arrested for it now. But we kind of picked the gates up and took them and hid them down the back of the hill, which they weren't very happy about neither.
So you were pretty naughty when you were.
Yeah,
kid,
there's not much to do growing up in a village, so you just kind of run around and just do stupid stuff like throw eggs at people's windows, which is about as aggressive, or whatever you call it, as bad as you would get.
All right.
So yeah, but
Nothing really terrible.
no, nothing too terrible, really. No. So yeah, I mean, this is it. We'll go down to the village and we can have a little sit down there and see what you think.
Sure.
I'll see you in there.
All right.
Okay.
Let's go. But would you generally say that you had like a happy childhood or?
Yeah, I think so.
adolescence?
I think
Yeah?
so. I think, yeah, I mean, parents were prone to arguing a bit, you know,
Oh well.
as I think a lot of parents can be.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of stress going on. But when I look back on it now, I do think there was a lot of happy times, you know, a lot of escapism from my part, you know.
Oh yeah.
You know, but this here, which looks like it's closed down now, used to be.
That there?
I used to live further up. I would walk down on a Sunday morning, and they used to have these horror movie cards, trading cards, so you get a stick of chewing gum. So I used to come there and I'd buy like the Universal horror movie ones, or the Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Hammer horror ones, just from that shop there, which used to be a newsagent's. And I guess it was turned into like a little diner, but I guess it's closed down, which is a shame, really. And the Duke of York pub is still there. My granddad used to drink in there.
Your
Quite a lot.
granddad.
Yeah, my granddad, yeah. Great tale with my granddad is when I brought Danny from Napalm Death down here.
Yeah.
And I said to Danny from Napalm, I said, please don't drink with my granddad.
Okay.
And Danny goes, I'll be fine. You know, I said, please. Of course, my granddad just maimed him completely. So Danny was like, absolutely, he's like, man, your granddad could drink. I said, I told him, don't drink with my granddad. You know, you can't
So
do it.
drink with the granddad.
So, yeah. Actually, it's a bus stop. So I would catch the bus here to a place called Wellington. And that was where there's a record store that sold all the heavy metal.
All right.
So that's where I bought Venom, Welcome to Hell. Come back on the bus, and it would drop you, come back, and then go back home. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, how did you make your way to when you went to shows and stuff like that?
Well,
How did you do that?
my friend Mitch Dickinson again, because Mitch is originally from Birmingham.
All right.
His family moved here, I met them when they were 10, same age.
Yeah.
So Mitch's dad would go and see his parents, and that was a good excuse. But usually, because there was 4 or 5 of us, somebody had to miss the occasional show, so we took it in turns.
So you could fit in a car.
Yeah, exactly. So that was it. Because you could take the train, but I was shy. I was too nervous. I don't think I had the money to go on the train really, but too nervous in a way.
Right.
So I'd miss some stuff, you know.
What kind of shows like spring to mind, like
well,
standout shows?
Tigers of Pantang. Saw Ozzy. My favourite show at the Birmingham Odeon was probably Judas Priest was good because it was, I think, the Defenders of the Faith tour. But I was standing behind the guys from Witchfinder General.
Oh, really?
So that was kind of, it was like surreal because there's Judas Priest, but there's the guys from Witchfinder General. When Venom played with Exodus, it was great.
Ooh, all right.
So sometimes I walk past the Birmingham Odeon and think, oh, in 1985 I was hanging out with Gary Holt and Paul Bailoff. You know?
Amazing.
So it's kind of trippy when you think about those things.
Yeah.
That's some of the shows that stand to mind, you know. And of course you come to Saxon. Saxon was amazing, so loud. You know, come back and you know waiting for them just there where I catch the bus to school.
All right.
And then your ears would be ringing from the all the loud music, you know. So it's pretty crazy, really. But let's walk on a little bit down here.
Sure.
Here's an interesting thing here, where we just have a fish and chip shop. It's just a fish and chip shop.
Yeah.
But my mum worked there. In fact, my mum and my dad and my granddad were there for years. And they used to have Donkey Kong up in the top room. I used to go and play Donkey Kong. So my mum was quite popular with some of the poorer families, I think, because they knew her, they all grew up together kind of thing. So she would kind of like cook extra chips and fish and feed them. Which I don't think the boss was very pleased about, to be fair. But one instance here, you have the square, which is where the local ruffians would hang out. So we would come down and we would get made fun of because we were heavy metal, you know.
Yeah.
And the one guy was very, very tough with me a few times. I guess maybe I was a bit of a mummy's boy, what can I say? Maybe I was. But my mum threatened him with a knife, so it wasn't very good, really. There you go.
That was the end of that story.
That was the end of that. These flats here, right here, were where my friend Mitch used to live. And so on Saturday, most, you know, weeknights or weekends, the middle ones there.
All right.
That's where Mitch lived with his brother and his mum. So on Saturdays, his mum would go out shopping or whatever, and we'd listen to like heavy metal records there. And
Banging to Rainbow.
yeah, so yeah, what the idea was you'd put your foot underneath the sofa so you wouldn't fall over, and you'd go for it. And Stargazer was the test, like who could reach the end of Stargazer, and of course I always got there, you know. No one else, me.
Bravo.
And there's a few pubs up there, which of course, we drank in a few times. We used to drink in Ironbridge, which is where we're going to go now. Ironbridge is where we would hang out because people would communicate there. Here was a bit like, if you're going to go in, you got long hair and you're going to get some problems and stuff. Actually, right down there is the local church. There's an interesting tale about the church, quickly, is when Lockup played Wacken in 2002, I think it was. My sister was getting married on the Saturday and we played on the Thursday. So we did the gig, of course, all of us.
But plastered.
But they were going in on Friday. I think it was Friday. Yeah, Friday. I said I'm staying at the hotel because I got to recover. And then, of course, our tour manager Jez Hale, who used to went to work on for everybody else. We flew into London for some God knows reason, and we drove from London here as fast as we could. And they got me at the church at 11:30. No, got me at my home. Sorry, 11:30. Just in time for to get dressed, my sister to get married. I was shaking hands with the vicar, the priest, 12:15, going, 2 days ago I was doing this, and now it's this. How you doing? And got drunk all day at my sister's wedding. Anyway.
Cool. There's one story that I missed in your book. I mean, it's not in your book, but you told me about this. When you had a school assignment and you handed in the lyrics to Beyond the Realms of Death.
Well, twice that happened. We had English, and of course, I wrote the lyrics to Beyond the Realms of Death. I also did Diary of a Madman. A's, A+ for both of them. Thank you,
But
Ozzy.
didn't they ask you like, do you...
Well, yeah, they go, Shane, can we have a quick word with you? What's the matter? I said, are you okay? Because these are quite dark lyrics. Are you feeling all right? I'm like, yeah, fine. No worries. These are very intricate lyrics you've done here. I said, well, you know. What can I say?
Cheating bastard.
What can I say? Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Ozzy. Or whatever it was I wrote him.
And Bob Daisley.
Bob Daisley. Thank you, Bob. And that was it. So that's that. And there we go. So yeah, this is it. And now when I come back now, which is kind of rare, but you appreciate growing up here.
Yeah.
It was kind of, you know,
see that.
in the 70s, it's a bit different, you know, I suppose. But and I'm sure at the weekends, you know, there's still, who knows what, but yeah. So up the right, if you go to tiny hill up there, you have a place called the Social Club. It's like a typical pub. My dad would drink up there. My granddad would drink just over there.
Did you become a bit of a local hero when Napalm Death started being on the telly and stuff
Well,
like
one of my
that?
friends I used to work with, Roy, who might live over there still, they have the Christmas lights every year.
Yeah.
And he asked me to turn the Christmas lights on, which I was like, I don't know, man, that's a bit like, yeah,
That's a bit too much.
it's a bit cheesy. I don't think
tacky.
yeah.
Right.
So there we go. But yeah, it's this is Rosalie. You know. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So this whole area here,
Yeah.
this building here, you just about see the top of it. Really,
Yeah.
I think it's a dog grooming centre now.
It is.
Is it?
Yeah, there's signs on that.
Yeah,
gate
dog
over
grooming
there.
centre. So all this, you can't really see too much in there now, but back in 1987, 88, this was like kind of semi-demolished building. And my friend Mitch Dickinson, who played on Unseen Terror and Warhammer with me, heresy guitarist, his father bought the house to renovate. But the interesting tale is Unseen Terror used to practice in that building right there, there you see, which is obviously not as in good state as it is now. And the back of the From Enslavement to Obliteration photographs were taken in that building. Napalm Death practiced in that building twice or three times. The Enemy magazine came down to see us for some reason, I don't know why, and interviewed us in that building, and we played in that building. Why we practiced there, it sort of baffles me, of all the locations. Mickey Harris would come to see me. And there used to be a bus from Birmingham that would drop you across the road in Iron Bridge, and you'd have to walk up a massive bank to Broseley, which I used to do regularly when I was drinking. So yeah, you know, you couldn't. It was like that. It's the only time you could drink and lose weight at the same time. Because you get drunk and you have to walk up this. You'd time it right so you'd miss the Chinese restaurants you wouldn't eat. And that's it. But yeah, that's where Napalm Death used to practice twice or three times. No one knows that, I don't think. People are probably quite surprised. So every time I come home, I walk past and I chuckle, you know, the noise that was being made. And then,
Out here in by
you
the
know,
Iron Bridge.
it's a very strange place to practice, you would think. You know.
We'll come to the end of this then. From probably one of the most metal places in the world. What is this, yeah?
I mean, this is called the Iron Bridge. This is the first ever Iron Bridge, as far as I know, in the world. It was designed by a guy called Thomas Telford, because this whole area is Telford. Thomas Telford was from Scotland and moved down here, I think. But he was part of it, and part of the design. And this whole area is steeped in industrial heritage, really, because down there you have Coalbrook Dale, Coalport, China, Bliss Hill, Broseley, where I'm from, is famous for clay pipes, you know.
You were telling me this is kind of the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution.
This is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, pretty much. So this is the original colour now. It was painted black. But of course, Broseley's just up there, like 1 mile and a half. So I would walk down here, all over there. There's a bunch of pubs, White Hart, the Malt House, the Swan, all of those pubs we went to drinking in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was still in Napalm Death. And we're coming back from the first Grind Crusher tour with Morbid Angel. I had a little bit of money. I was like, yeah, paid some money, come straight down here, went to that pub there, the Tontine, as you can see, and met Carl Stokes from Cancer again. Beer was had, and so that was it for it until I moved to Birmingham in, I don't know, mid-1990, but yeah, this whole area really is, all around here is lots of memories, you know, lots of weekends down here, you know, and you just come down as a kid and hang out because the river here, we used to swim in the river, which I wouldn't probably do now, and stuff, you know, like sort of I remember there was one school outing where I was meant to go somewhere, and instead I just got my sandwiches and just went down with my friends and jumped in the river. And got a smack on the ass from my mum for doing it, but there you go. But yeah, it's just good times, really.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Lot of history. No, all good.
Thanks for letting us into your past and your brain a little bit, you know, and thanks for helping out with making this happen for the first time. You know,
no worries. Good.
So yeah, cheers.
You can read a lot more of Shane's story in his book Life and Napalm Death, available now on napalmdeathbook.com. The latest Napalm Death albums are available through centurymedia.com. I hope you enjoyed the ride as much as I did, and if you liked this video, please subscribe for future content and upcoming episodes of Hanging with Anton.